One of the most interesting things that we have about Chautauqua County is the inventory of public and quasi-public lands and the question as to whether or not we ought to have more of them. Ought there be more land in public domain, or ought there be less land in public domain? We have in Chautauqua County, under the classification of public and quasi-public, about 35,000 acres of the county. The majority of the acreage is owned by the state of New York, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is in your town, in your village, in your hamlet. Do you have sufficient public lands for the needs of the public? There are various ways that you can look at it. If you have a neighborhood, there should be a neighborhood park. This is where the kids can go out and romp and play and possibly play pickup football, if you're allowed to do pickup football anymore. They seem to have put even the little children into leagues. But do you have a neighborhood park? Should you have a neighborhood park? Do you need a community park? And if so, what type of a community park do you need? So when we look at the inventory in Chautauqua County, we can say, well, maybe there's things that we need because of our neighborhood needs, our community needs, our sub-regional needs, and regional needs in general. I would like you to look at a map that I have here of the general public lands in Chautauqua County, and this gives you the pattern of the public lands. These are mostly state reforestation lands, county reforestation lands, and watershed lands. These are properties and lands that are open to the public generally, except for the watershed lands in critical periods of the year. The state reforestation lands and the county reforestation lands allow public access. And in the case of the state lands, you may camp or use the lands on a daily basis without any problem. If you want to do long-term camping and establish a camp for a number of days or a week or something like that, you need to get a permit from the state of New York, Department of Environmental Conservation, Division of Lands and Forests. You can get that at Faulkner or you can get that at Olean. As a municipal planner, I have always been interested in people and the needs of people and how far the people need to go to satisfy their particular needs. All of our villages in Chautauqua County and some of our hamlets have parks. However, when I came here in 1960, the inventory wasn't too high. Through some process, the Board of Supervisors, in looking at a state grant program, decided that maybe some of our local municipalities didn't have the resources to respond to the state program, so they offered to pick up half of the cost of the local acquisition or development of a parkland. And through Lee Batterson down at the Allegheny State Park, the program is administered in Chautauqua County. In a number of instances, we have some nice new parks because of this program. Or we have improvements in parks, or we have improvements in the case of the city of Dunkirk, they used all of their grant money from the county to improve their harbor facility. The harbor facility is a public facility. It's an interesting facility. It's got some real strange history about it. In village, town, and city park systems, we have 2,300 acres of land, more or less. These are, in some instances, improved properties. In some instances, they are land bank properties waiting to be developed when there is a need for them. But I would suggest that you as an individual check with your village board, your town board, and see where your town or village parks are. The city park systems are pretty well defined. We're also talking about quasi-public. And one of the quasi-public things that I am interested in is the 100-acre lot owned by the city of Jamestown school children. They own Lot 1, Map 1 of the tax maps of the town of Poland. It's a 100-acre lot. It's basically been managed as a reforestation area, but it is an area for the children of the city of Jamestown school system to go out and commune with nature in a wooded motif. Some instances, the areas are very active. As an example, if you go to the hamlet of Stockton, you'll find their Mill Creek Pond Park. This is a park that was developed with the grant assistance from the state and the local the county government. I'm sorry to say that the county government program was terminated before all local jurisdictions took advantage of it. I believe that there are several towns that still have no public lands whatsoever. However, in terms of ownership by the town government. However, in a number of instances, these are towns that have large state reforestation areas in them. These reforestation areas are to be operated on a multiple use concept, which means they're not only to raise trees, possibly to protect a watershed, but they're also hunting areas and they're also camping areas and hiking areas that the public all have access to. The only problem that you have with the state reforestation land is that if you read the law says you will not use mechanized vehicles on them. Based on this concept, a number of years ago, we looked at the state reforestation lands and what they meant as a resource. And one of the things that I identified when I came to the county was that the privilege of trespass, which basically covered all of Chautauqua County for generations, was disappearing. The first thing a new lander came in and did was to post his land. It's my kingdom, stay off of it. Or they came in and they use it as a seasonal property for hunting purposes or summer use. And the first thing they did when they got their ownership was that they posted it. And from 1960 to 1970, I watched an awful lot of land have its privilege of trespass disappear. The County Planning Board was then given a resolution on the question of whether or not there should be a county park system, and we now have a county park system that is very restricted in its activity, because what they did was to analyze in a report published in 1968 what the resources were that served us for recreational purposes. And we also looked at the Allegheny State Park as being a resource. We even feel that Presque Isle in Pennsylvania is a recreational resource for the people of Chautauqua County. The largest owner of public land in Chautauqua County is the state of New York, and it holds it in the following manners. You have Long Point State Park, you have Lake Erie State Park as active, intensive areas in the county. You then have the Arkwright Fish and Game Lands, and then you have some 16,000 acres of reforestation land, basically in the high country of the county. These lands were picked up in the 30s because they had been abandoned and they were no longer producing taxes for the municipalities in which they were located. The people had just walked away from them. And the state of New York came in and acquired these properties. The county has about 900 acres of reforestation land. They were picked up at the same time that the state reforestation lands were picked up. And I'm sorry, that's not true. Most of them were picked up in the 50s. These lands were managed to set an example as to how lands could be reforested and used. And in a number of instances, the county has put lean-tos on these properties, and so the public can go out and have an overnight experience on them. Some of them have ponds, some of them are along waterways. What is a regional park? Or better yet, what is a community park? And is a community park something that is operated by the Board of Public Utilities of a municipality or the Department of Public Works or a park department, or is it a combination of possibly school and park lands? One of the things that we did in fast-growing regions of the United States as planners during the 60s and the 70s was to try and develop the concept of a school park system where the recreational needs and play fields for the school were integrated with the larger question of general recreation for the community. We have few of these in Chautauqua County. We have a number of school parks, we have a number of school grounds with the facilities that they need for their recreational and not only their recreational activities or after-school sports, but for their athletic needs and for their gym requirements. But these are not being used in general as a general community resource. And I think we ought to look at that in parts of Chautauqua County. Look at them and the lands adjacent to them, and should they be larger. Quasi-public lands are even more interesting. The biggest holder of quasi-public lands are fire companies and hunt clubs, or conservation clubs. And we have them scattered throughout Chautauqua County. They own somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 acres of the county. We might also include in there Jamestown Audubon that has 596 acres in its Riverside Road facility. A piece of land that they are now looking at and saying, what are we going to do with it as a long-term experience for people, and they're having quite a challenge. The conservation clubs, of course, each have their own plans. In some instances, the number of members of conservation clubs are in decline, or fish and game clubs, whichever term you would like to use. And the question of their continued inventory, or as an item of the inventory in public lands, is up to question. We also have about 4,500 to 5,000 acres of commercial recreation land that is owned by such places as Peak and Peak, Cane, public golf courses, and I should say private golf courses. We have some public golf courses in the inventory, but very few. The majority of these lands, the commercial lands, the only way you have access to them is through membership. This is also the case with a number of the quasi-public lands. If you're in the town of Ellery, and the town of Ellery government is very conscious of the fact that they have no town parks, but when you look at the number of quasi-public and public accesses that are in the town of Ellery, you're hard-pressed to say to the town of Ellery board, you've got to be involved in a town park system. All you have to do is go up and down the lake shore in the town of Ellery and look at the quasi-public holdings and realize that these quasi-public holdings are tax exempt, and you understand the frustration of the town board of the town of Ellery. Conversely, we have the town of North Harmony that has no access to Chautauqua Lake for the general public of the town. We have a historic story we can tell about that. In the late 60s, I stood on Camp Chautauqua grounds when it was a church camp, and stood there with Lee Batterson and Charlie McDonald, who was then the town supervisor. And the asking price by the church camp ownership was that this land, we'll give it up for $42,000. And Lee Batterson said, and that if the town wants to pick it up, the state of New York will give $21,000 towards its purchase. And I stood there representing the Board of Supervisors, and I was able to say to them that the Board of Supervisors would put up $10,000. So that the town of North Harmony at that time would have had to put up $11,000 to own what is now Camp Chautauqua, a campground. And Charlie McDonald said, nice idea, but if we buy it, the people are going to want us to develop it, and we just don't feel that we can carry that type of burden on the tax rolls of the town. Now, there are a number of accesses to Chautauqua Lake that are public, but they're public in a quasi-public or very restricted manner. There's almost 100 street ends dedicated right into the lake. But if you look at the title of those streets and the people that have access to them, they're not dedicated to the public per se. They're dedicated to the access for people. And in Lakewood, in some instances, people that are 2 and 3 blocks away from the lake have part of that entitlement. And so those are very restricted accesses. On Chautauqua Lake, of course, our public access is interestingly unique. We have the state of New York being the largest landowner in that they have the fish hatchery, they have the Long Point State Park, they have the access in Bemis Point. They've just purchased Tom's Point as a reservation area because of the muskellunge spawning off of Tom's Point. And there is discussion at this time that additional lands should be either put into public ownership or some type of ownership that would not allow further development of these lands. I'm not going to get into that debate. The next largest owners along the shores of the Chautauqua Lake are the quasi-campground and fraternal organizations, followed by the Cheney family, then, which is totally private land. And then we have the village of Mayville Park. The village owns 3,500 feet of shoreline. And we have the park sponsored by the village of Lakewood. And we have the Burtis Bay holdings that have gone through a number of ownerships with a number of goals in the town of Ellicott that the town of Ellicott now holds as lake access. It has not been developed very extensively, however. These are important lands to the people. If you look at some real estate ads for Mayville, they'll say, house for sale with lake access, and then you find out that the lake access is through the village park. But that's important, that the people can get to the lake. In the case of the town of Ellery, the people get their access either through the quasi-public uses or through Long Point State Park. But as I say, the town of North Harmony does not have access. On Lake Erie, all of the municipal governments facing Lake Erie have some form of access, either through a state park development or through their own efforts of acquiring property. This goes for Ripley, Westfield, Portland, town of Dunkirk, town of Sheridan, and the town of Hanover with the village of Silver Creek. In a number of instances, some of these programs have been assisted by county funding and by state and federal funding. We should look now, again, at our park resources and what we are doing with them and whether or not we should have additional lands for the future. And by the future, I'm not talking about 10 or 20 years. I'm talking about 50 or 100 years. What is the pattern of use and ownership going to be to the unique and the special areas of Chautauqua County, and should these be in public holdings, whether it be county, town, village, or possibly even a hamlet, but that would be a town effort in a number of instances. The intensity of use for the near future in a number of these areas is not dynamic. However, when you get into some of the villages, village recreational programs use their lands dynamically in the summer months. Some towns have that type of a program also. But are there unique and special areas still remaining that are not in county, state, or local ownership that we should have? Now realize we've got some very special ownerships, such as the Village of Westfield watershed, which is basically Chautauqua Gorge, of which Devin Taylor has written about. But the major ownership along Chautauqua Gorge is the Village of Westfield and its watershed management program. They do not deny public access to these lands, except in rare occasions when we have very, very low flows of water or annual precipitation. Why is it that almost every presentation I've made, I end up getting back to water and rain or annual precipitation? But anyway, the Village of Westfield has been very open in allowing the public on their lands. I can think of only 1 or 2 occasions in the 30 years that I've been here, 35 years, that the village has said, please stay out of the watershed lands. Realize that we also have another series of rather special accesses along a number of the streams of Chautauqua County. The state has gone in and acquired the fishing rights to these particular properties. And the public has access at points where they can park their cars and they can go into these streams and fish. However, that's the only activity that they're that is allowed in those particular areas. And there's a number of streams in the county that type of ownership exists, including part of Chautauqua Gorge, part of the Broken Straw, and actually too many places to name. We also have another rather unique system of ownerships, and if we can turn to the easel and look at the maps that create the, or identify the Chautauqua County trail system, we can look at unique ownership in the fact that the county does not necessarily own these properties. They own the right of the public to travel over them. And you'll notice that in the East Side Trail, if we can scan up to the East Side Trail, that there's an awful lot of green illustrated on the map. Those are state reforestation lands or state fish and wildlife lands. And the trails that connect them, in one or two instances, have to go on public rights of way because the county, in acquiring and developing this system, decided that they did not want to use their power of condemnation to get onto the private lands. But you can see a trail system running down and through the state reforestation lands and on private lands. These are basically easements. They are very restrictive easements. In the vast majority of instances, including the state of New York, the easement was given, but it was given and denied the use of motorized vehicles on these easements. So that these are basically hiking and skiing trails. These are our privilege of access that can exist in perpetuity for the people of Chautauqua County. Both the overland trails and the waterway trails have been recognized as part of a national system of trails. We can also scan the West Side Trail and get an idea of that trail system also. These maps, by the way, are available either through the Department of Public Works or through the Chautauqua County Department of Planning. And anybody is allowed to move along these trails, but you must respect the type of easement that we have, and that is that we have the right to walk or ski upon them. Some people have said, why didn't you build bridle paths along these trails? Why didn't you? Because there was no restriction in the way the easement was developed. Well, the problem is that once you develop a trail and you invite someone to go on that trail, all of a sudden there are state or regional standards or national standards that these things should be developed to, and if there is an accident along these trails, all of a sudden you can find yourself in court if the litigant decides that you haven't maintained the trail correctly for the particular use that you've identified it for. And when you start saying, well, let's have a bridle path, all of a sudden you can look in the architectural graphic standards, and it's spelled out in there what a bridle path should look like, how it should be constructed, how much clearance there should be about it. So in a number of instances, when we look at these special easements, they are very restricted to low hazard or low design standard criteria because we can't afford to build them. To build a bridle path, we're talking about dollars and dollars per running foot of bridle path if it's going to meet the national standards that you're going to have to face if you're going to go to court. Same way with snowmobile trails. The state of New York has a snowmobile reimbursement program brought from the licensing of the snowmobiles, but the state of New York says your trail shall only be allowed to have these refunded grants on the basis of your maintaining a particular standard. And that includes intersection signs, daily grooming, and these types of things. They are wonderful things to have, but you've got to understand what happens when you acquire these special easements and then you invite people to use them. Once you invite people to use them, all of a sudden you have a responsibility that you didn't have before when the people were just wandering through a particular area. So I challenge the people of Chautauqua County to look at the question as to whether or not your municipality has enough neighborhood parks, enough community park, and whether or not you can combine school and community park activity more than we have. And I think we should look at that as we struggle with the question of school systems in Chautauqua County and what we should do with them. Can we make them more of a multi-centered community focus area by putting the community recreation associated with the school grounds? It's not going to work in every place, but there are places that it could be worked. There is now pressure to reevaluate whether or not Chautauqua County should be in a reforestation program. There are people that believe that the county should not be in a park system program, that there are adequate facilities. In the creation of the county park system, the recommendation that created the county park system said we will do those things that are related to the special areas of the county that are intermunicipal. And that's why we have created a overland trail system. We also have, as part of the county park system, 3 overview sites, one on Thayer Road that has been totally developed, and the people have been enjoying it now for several years. We are now looking at the creation, or the development of the Oak Hill site in the town of Carroll, and then we have which by the way has a magnificent 360-degree view, and if you want to be awestruck, go there in the fall at the height of color. You can swivel your head 360 degrees like an owl and get this wonderful, wonderful experience. We also have an overview site in the town of North Harmony, back away from the lake, that allows you to look up lake and down lake in an experience that is only available at a few sites. We have one other site that I'm interested in, and I hope that we get into development, and that is the rest stop on the Southern Tier Expressway in the town of Ellery. One of the reasons that the people that were involved with the park system, county park system proposal, didn't touch that, is that we have an opportunity there. They have acquired a rest area that has an opportunity for a beautiful overview of the southern half of Chautauqua Lake, but the state has not seen fit at this point to develop it. In the final moments here that I have, looking at park and public land development, or maybe it isn't development that we're looking at. Maybe what we're looking at is let's leave it alone and let's give us an experience over the next 60 or 70 or 80 years of looking at a woodland experience that we have no comprehension of. This afternoon at the Roger Torrey Peterson Institute, there is going to be a presentation on old forests that I'm going to, because we have a few old forests in Chautauqua County, and I'm sorry to say, to the best of my knowledge, none of them are in public holdings at this time. One of them is in quasi-public ownership. And I think we ought to look at whether or not we should give the people of Chautauqua County an old forest experience, and should we do it on public lands, and realize that if we want to give them an old forest experience, we've got to hold the lands that we have now that are county reforestation lands and allow them to continue to mature and not harvest timber from them, but give us someplace. I've had a number of people say, where can I go see a virgin timber in Chautauqua County? There is no virgin timber in Chautauqua County to the best of my knowledge. We've got forests that have been developed and grown and matured since 1811 for all practical purposes, which is the birth of Chautauqua County. Caucasian people or European people in Chautauqua County, we're talking about the turn of the century, 1795, something like that. Do we want to give the people of the future of Chautauqua County an old forest or an old land experience? One other thing that we have done is we have created a canoe route down the Cassadaga River, which means that we have acquired accesses and easements as the law has required, and you can now canoe from Redbird Corners down to the state line on the Cassadaga River. And in several instances, there are rest areas and lean-tos that the public can use along that particular route. Another part of the new county park system. How much do we need to add for the experience of future generations, or do we have enough? Maybe there's too much land in public ownership. I don't know that that's the case. The state of New York has just acquired the Alder Bottom, or parts of the Alder Bottom, and they've also acquired parts of the Hartson Swamp to preserve for future generations' experience in Chautauqua County as part of public lands and public recreation.